Hey, happy champers, Marnie from Bubble and Flute here, Santé. So today, let's chat Grand Marques versus growers, houses versus teeny tiny little producers. So, what's the difference? So first of all, Grand Marques or houses are the brands that we all know and love. I cut my teeth on champagne, loving Veuve Clicquot and Paul Roger and Bollinger and Taittinger and all the big names that we know and love. So Grand Marques or houses are also known on the label by the initials NM, which means négociant, manipulant, and that determines the fact that they are actually able to buy grapes to put from anywhere to put into their champagne. So some houses own vineyards themselves, and some actually own not a single plot of land. And some of them will use their own grapes supplemented by grapes that they buy in. Others will just 100% buy in grapes from growers all over the place. So, which brings us to the growers. So growers are exactly as the name implies. They are people who grow the grapes that go into champagne. So traditionally, going back to earlier this century and last century, the model was that the big houses bought the grapes from the little growers and everybody was happy, except they weren't really, because there was a massive riot in the early part of the 1900s over a range of issues between the inequities that were perceived and probably not perceived were real between the big houses and the growers. So the houses were seen to be taking advantage of the growers. They were, fixing prices for grapes and pushing the prices down so that the growers had the advantage. They were also rumoured to be buying in grapes from producers outside the Champagne region and using them in the champagnes, which is wildly illegal. And as a consumer, that sucks because you buy champagne for a reason. So there was traditionally a bit of argy-bargy between the growers and the houses, and it all culminated in the early 1900s in some massive riots where the growers rioted, and to be honest, they actually burnt the village of Champagne, which has been rebuilt and is one of my favourite champagne villages. They burnt it to the ground. So many of the historic structures and houses there just were razed to the ground and they had to rebuild and start all over again. But the good thing that came out of the riots was that there were several different initiatives implemented to help redress the balance a little bit between the growers and the houses. And I think as that balance has started to be redressed, you've also seen a bit of a rise of grower champagnes because they've come out, the growers, and gone, you know what, we've got our hands on these amazing grapes, and at the end of the day, grapes are a really important part, and the quality of the grapes is a really important part of making champagne. You know what, I reckon I can have a crack at this champagne making business, and voila, they have. And they've actually been doing an amazing job of it. So let's say 15,000 people growing grapes in Champagne, only 2,000 of them are actually growers who are producing champagne under their own names. In contrast, the houses, there's only 380 of them, but they account for 2/3 of all champagne exports from France. So definitely strength in numbers with the houses. So should we talk some pros and cons of the two different types of producers? So houses, other than the fact that they're loaded and have millions and millions of dollars, the key advantage that they have comes from the pure definition of who they are, a house. They can buy grapes from anywhere in the region. So there's two things that make that a distinct advantage for the houses. The first is variety and diversity. So they can produce they can buy grapes from anywhere across the region. So if they want to produce a wine that is underpinned by the gorgeous, boozy Pinot Noir terroir, they buy grapes from Boozy. If they want to produce a wine that is that classic Côte de Blanc, Chardonnay, then they're going to buy their grapes from Cremant or Avize or somewhere in the Côte de Blanc. So they can have their pick, to be honest, of where they can buy the grapes from. So the advantage there, it means they can produce more champagne and they can produce a wider variety of champagne because they're not limited by the grapes and the quality and the style of grapes that they produce themselves. The second advantage is again underpinned by that same philosophy that they can buy grapes from anywhere, is that if you have a bad season, or if you have some frost, or if you get some rot, or if there's a hailstorm that wipes out a particular selection of vineyards, a village or a region, the houses will just move on and buy their grapes from somewhere else. So if their favourite Pinot Meunier plots was trashed, they'll buy their Meunier from somewhere else. Whereas if you are a grower and you are restricted to producing champagne that comes from just the vineyards that you own, if you get bad weather and you end up with rot, or if you get a hailstorm, or if you get frost, or if you're wiped out by a flood, unfortunately, you can't buy grapes, you can't produce champagne. So that is the disadvantage of being a grower and only having access to your own grapes. But the advantage is the grapes that you have, you care for, you tend to, you know everything that happens to them from the minute they are planted to the moment I sip from my glass. And you can tell me that story and I can tell you that story because I can taste it, because they're very, very unique and expressive because of exactly where they've come from. They've come from a particular village, they've come from a particular plot, and they've been cared for in a particular way, which makes them beautifully expressive. And that's what's exciting about growers' champagnes. The big marques, the big grand marques, and the houses, on the other hand, they design their champagne to taste the same year in, year out. So they're what I would call a blended beauty. Any non-vintage champagne from one of the major houses, let's say the Clicquot, Paul Roger, Bollinger, Moet and Chandon, any of them, they will have up to 100, 150 different villages and the fruits from all across the region blended into it. And they do that to get a very, very consistent taste. But in doing that, when it comes down to the law of averages, when you blend something, you blend out all the uniqueness, you blend out all the things that make it special and specific in terms of turning it into something that is blended and consistent and beautiful. So that is the style of the houses, and so they work that to their advantage. And the style of the growers is to be expressive and unique and celebrate what comes from exactly in that plot of land, and what makes them exciting. One of the best analogies I think that I've ever read is from one of my favourite champagne writers, Peter Liam, and he talks about them comparing the houses and the growers as looking at a symphony versus a soloist. So when you're in a symphony, you have hundreds of musicians who come together to produce an amazing performance that in its own right is an incredible feat and incredibly beautiful thing to behold. Whereas a soloist, there's no hiding if you're having an off day. There's no hiding if a string is not quite tuned perfectly or your voice is a little bit husky. You are there on your own and you shine, and everybody sees exactly what you bring on that particular day. No matter what your history is, no matter what you did last week, no matter what you did last month, what you bring on that day is what is going to shine. So that is the beauty of the growers. And I love that analogy. And I think it makes the point really clearly that one's not better than the other. They're just different. And you know, I have my days when I would like nothing more than to kick back with a glass of mum and just chill and just enjoy champagne that I know is always going to be champagne. I'm never going to have to think about it. It's always going to taste the same. I'm going to enjoy it, but there's nothing to think about. And there are other days when I love to pick up a little grower producer champagne, like this one that I've got in my glass right here actually is a small producer, Champagne du Mesnil, in fact, and it makes you want to think, and you can actually pick it up and you'll go, ooh, I can smell this and I can smell that. With this one in particular, the first thing that hit me when I smelt it was boom, this whack of like salivary glands going into overdrive from the Chardonnay, and it was really strong and there's no sugar added, so it couldn't mask anything. And I know that this particular producer has champagnes that are all from the Montana Hans. However, this is a Chardonnay dominated champagne, so you do get this amazing acidity, but it's a completely different style of Chardonnay. It's not so chalky, it's not so limey. I'm getting more flowers, white flowers, and I'm getting more tropical fruits in it as well. So it's super, super exciting, and they're completely different. And my advice is just try and explore as many as you can. And you know what? I'm a geek, so I know everyone's not the same as me, but Google the champagne that you are tasting. Someone, somewhere in the world, hopefully on my blog, will have information about it. So you can sit there and go, ah, So this is from this village, and this has got, I can taste that it's got no sugar, and yeah, I can tell that it's Pinot Noir, and that's what that particular area of the Champagnes are like. So it's kind of fun if that's your thing, and it's my thing. If it wasn't, I wouldn't write a champagne blog, right? Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed my little intro to the differences between Grand Marques and grower champagnes. I've got a blog about it, which is like really, really long, and I do write pretty much everything that I have just said, but sometimes it's easier just to kick back and listen than it is to read a long, complicated blog. But there is more information in the blog, and I go into more detail about how you can recognize a grower versus a house, and then looking at the label, because it will tell you on the label of the champagne bottle. And then I always also talk about 3 or 4 other different types of champagne producers that there are as well, that are not as common, but they're certainly worth knowing about. So that's all over on the blog. So tell me what you think in either reply to my email, pop it in the comments below. Do you love your Grand Marques? Do you love your growers? What are you drinking today? Is there any growers that you want to learn more about? Is there any regions that you want to learn more about? If there's ever anything else I can tell you about champagne, just ask, because I can talk about champagne all day, every day, because I love it and it's what I do. But for now, santé.